seems to be expanding. Nicholas Hawke, Al Jazeera, Brussels.
Switzerland has temporarily closed its embassy in Tehran, but it's pledged to keep an open line of communication between the U.S. and Iran. The Swiss ambassador cited security risks, but promised to return as soon as possible. As a neutral country, Switzerland has played a key role in maintaining basic diplomatic contacts between Washington and Tehran since the 1979 revolution. Spain has decided to permanently withdraw its ambassador to Israel. Israel accuses the Spanish government of, quote, standing with tyrants for opposing the war in Iran. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has been one of the few European leaders to condemn the U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran. Israel withdrew its ambassador from Madrid in 2024 after Spain's recognition of Palestinian statehood. The U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran led to angry scenes in the UK's House of Commons on Wednesday. UK public opinion is against direct involvement. But as Richard Gaisford reports from the main U.S. base at RAF Fairford, preparations are well underway for further heavy bombing raids.
Bunker-busting JDAM bombs are loaded into B-1 Lancer bombers at RAF Fairford. It signals a change in choice of munitions technology, with a different type of standoff missile system being removed from the aircraft. A US Air Force cargo plane delivers supplies to a base that's fast become an active hub for strategic bombing operations. Trolley loads of JDAM bombs were seen being taken across the runway. 3 B-1 bombers returned here to Fairford after what's believed to be the first US mission to Iran from a British base during this conflict. And throughout the day, along with the rest of the world's media and the public who live around here, we've been watching the ground crew maintain those aircraft and rearm them. MPs on the House of Commons Defence Select Committee have been briefed on the use of British bases for what should be defensive operations.
What I do know is that there's been a continuing conversation between the British government and the Americans, and the British are actually looking at each individual target and clearing them, as is standard procedure. And so we're making sure that the Americans are operating within the agreement that we have with them around the use of our bases.
The Prime Minister's faced criticism from opposition leaders for not helping Donald Trump with the joint Israeli assault on Iran. He feels his judgment was right.
I'm not going to take lectures from someone who says we should join the war, and a week later says, can I change my mind? I got that wrong. It is deeply embarrassing.
British opinion polls show a large and growing majority against the war. The fact that some of it is now being waged from the UK is likely to bring tough questions for the government in the coming days. Richard Gaisford, Al Jazeera, Fairford, England.
Australian farmers are being hit hard by the Middle East conflict, with soaring fertilizer prices threatening food security. The country imports almost 70% of the chemical urea, which is used in the product. With winter approaching in the southern hemisphere, farmers are stockpiling what they can ahead of the planting season. Danielle Robertson reports from central New South Wales.
In today's agricultural market, when fertiliser is available and how much it costs is beyond a farmer's control. So Lachlan Max Smith is stockpiling everything he can.
I've been here 73 years. I've never seen fuel price and fertiliser go up so quickly at such a critical time. We've got lambs to feed in the feedlot and we want to put our crops in. It really is a critical time this has gone on, and we have nowhere to go.
The Middle East is a major supplier of urea, the main chemical widely used as a fertiliser, and Australia imports most of its supplies. Shipping delays in the Strait of Hormuz have led to price increases. Farmers here tell us it's already spiked by 20%, threatening grain production.
It doesn't just affect the farmers in terms of input costs, but those input costs will be transferred to consumers in terms of their bread and meat.
Higher fuel prices are compounding the situation, with each livestock feed delivery more expensive than the last. Farmers here are often described as the backbone of the Australian economy, and so the pressures felt here could ripple through the supply chain, with warnings the entire food industry could be at risk. Small grains carrying the weight of economic survival. Danielle Robertson, Al Jazeera, Central West New South Wales, Australia.
All right, let's take a look at some of the day's other news now. Palestinian families in the occupied West Bank are in mourning after a surge in attacks by Israeli settlers. They say the violence has intensified since Israel and the U.S. launched a joint offensive against Iran. Authorities have confirmed at least 5 Palestinians have been killed by settlers in recent days. Hamza Mohammed reports.
Grief fills the home of Malak Berat. Her husband, Thair Hamayil, was killed by Israeli settlers. Now she clings to his clothes, searching for traces of the life they shared. Witnesses say Thair was trying to protect his neighbors in Khirbit Abu Falah, north of Ramallah. His cousin was also killed. Residents say more than 100 settlers had amassed near the village.
The young men and the people gathered to protect the area. There was a huge number of settlers. At the beginning, it was stone throwing. Then the settlers started to shoot towards the residents. I was with them at a site away from the settlers. They shot towards us, and unfortunately, the bullet hit his head, killing him.
The Israeli rights group Beit Salim says a third man died after inhaling tear gas. Israeli forces deployed to the village fired during the violence. A day later, another Palestinian was killed near Hebron. This video shows him lying on the ground after being shot. A uniformed settler holds a weapon nearby. The Israeli military said the shooter was a reserve soldier and that it's opened an investigation. Monitoring groups have documented more than 100 settler attacks in the occupied West Bank since the US-Israeli offensive against Iran began less than 2 weeks ago. With an increase in shootings, assault, property damage and threats, Palestinians say they feel increasingly alone and unprotected. Hamza Mohammed, Al Jazeera.
An Israeli airstrike killed a Palestinian man and injured dozens more on Tuesday. This comes as Israel continues to bombard the Gaza Strip, despite a ceasefire reached in October. The Palestinian Health Ministry says more than 600 people have been killed in these attacks across the Gaza Strip. Ibrahim Al-Khalili reports from Gaza City.
Nearly 5 months since the U.S. brokered ceasefire took hold here in the besieged Gaza Strip, and people think that the guns fell silent, but the Israeli forces had other plans. Another ceasefire violation committed by the Israeli forces here in the west of Gaza City, resulting in killing 1 Palestinian and injuring many more here. People here come to get the basic necessities during the holy month of Ramadan. We can clearly see here the situation is catastrophic in the light of the ongoing Israeli violations. The government media office says that the Israeli military committed 1,950 ceasefire violations since the ceasefire took hold here in the Gaza Strip. These civil defense teams have arrived to the place here to rescue the injured Palestinians. What was meant to be a place of family gathering and to get the basic necessities for their families now turned into a site of deadly attacks. Ibrahim Al-Khalili, Al Jazeera, Gaza City, Palestine.
Tensions are rising again in northern Ethiopia, raising fears of another war in the Tigray region just 3 years after a devastating conflict killed hundreds of thousands of people. Residents say banks are running out of cash, basic supplies are scarce, and federal forces are once again deploying near the region's borders. Many civilians are now leaving the regional capital, Mekelle, fearing the fragile peace could collapse. Catherine Soy reports.
People from Ethiopia's Tigray region are leaving the capital, Mekelle, by whatever means they can. Some say they're escaping the possibility of renewed fighting between armed groups, the government, and forces from Eritrea on Tigray's border.
We are really scared. During the last war, I was pregnant. I had to flee from here to Mekone. I suffered a lot during delivery. All that suffering had passed and we returned here.
At the northern border with Eritrea, banks are running out of cash and basic supplies are scarce. Everyone remembers the last conflict. Starting in 2020, Ethiopian government forces fought alongside soldiers in Eritrea to contain the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF. All sides have been accused of human rights abuses.
Many civilians died here, not only those who went to fight. Civilians who stayed behind also died. This is why people are now leaving their property behind and fleeing.
By the time it ended 2 years later, more than 600,000 people had been killed and many more displaced. About 150 kilometers south of Mekelle, the scars of that war remain. The town of Chercher borders Amhara region. People here are not just worried about tensions with Eritrea, but ongoing conflicts between armed groups at the border with Tigray.
I don't know for certain if war is coming, but from what people are saying, I think war is inevitable. We feel very close to disaster. I don't know what to do.
Analysts say what's happening between Eritrea and Ethiopia is partly over access to the Red Sea. When Eritrea declared independence from Ethiopia in 1993, Ethiopia lost direct access to the sea, and relations have been strained ever since. All this as Ethiopia is preparing for elections in May, and people in Tigray are calling on all sides to de-escalate before fighting erupts again. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera.
Chile's new far right-wing president has been sworn in. Jose Antonio Cast has promised to overturn some of the progressive policies of his left-wing predecessor. Chile is the world's largest producer of copper, and the U.S. has welcomed Cast's addition to the club of conservative governments in Latin America. Lucia Newman reports.
It's an image few would have imagined even a year ago. Jose Antonio Cast, the son of German immigrants, receiving Chile's presidential sash. It signals the sharpest political shift to the far right since the country's military coup in 1973.
To confront our emergencies in security, in healthcare, in education, employment, and so much more, Chile needs an emergency government, and that's what we'll have. An emergency government isn't a slogan, it's a reality. It means order where there's chaos, and a firm hand where there's impunity.
Outgoing left-wing President Gabriel Boric put on a brave face at the inauguration. Almost all the conservative leaders of the region were in attendance, embracing Cast with enthusiasm. Cast was a strong supporter of Chile's former dictator, General Augusto Pinochet, and, inspired by Donald Trump and his MAGA movement, has pledged to make Chile great again. He supports conservative social values and even broader free market economic policies. Chileans hope he will make good on his electoral promises to reduce crime, control undocumented migration, and increase economic growth. A sharp shift in foreign policy is already in the making. On Saturday, Cast attended a summit of like-minded regional leaders hosted by President Trump, who offered to use U.S. military missiles to crush organized crime in Latin America, an offer that Cast told us he would consider.
There are armed drug traffickers amongst us who kidnap people. What we're seeing in Chile should concern us, and anyone who offers collaboration will receive it.
Cast has indicated he'll end Chile's staunch support for the Palestinian cause in favor of Israel, and says he'll halt humanitarian aid to Cuba until there's a change of government. In these times of geopolitical uncertainties, the arrival of Latin America's newest president is being welcomed by members of the growing far-right wave in the Americas, a wave whose priorities President Trump has made clear he wants to determine. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera.
It's 0500 GMT. This is Al Jazeera with our continuing coverage of the ongoing conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom with all the latest developments. Iraq shuts down oil port operations after 2 foreign oil tankers are attacked in another escalation of the Middle East conflict. Israel's latest strikes on Beirut kill at least 8 people. A prominent seafront neighborhood is targeted. It follows large-scale airstrikes on Beirut's southern suburbs. More than 630 people have been killed by Israeli attacks in Lebanon. Offensive on northern Israel. Hezbollah and Iran carried out a wave of coordinated attacks. And the UN Security Council adopts a resolution condemning Iran's attacks on Gulf countries and Jordan. Iraq has suspended operations at its oil ports after 2 foreign fuel tankers were attacked in the southern port of Al-Faw. It comes as the escalating conflict in the Middle East enters its 13th day. Officials say Iran was behind the strike. At least 1 crew member was killed, while another 25 were rescued. And in Lebanon, at least 8 people have been killed in an Israeli attack on a popular beachfront district in Beirut. More than 30 people were injured in the strike on Ramlat al-Bayda. The Lebanese capital has been under another night of heavy Israeli bombardment. 600 people have been killed and thousands displaced since hostilities resumed between Hezbollah and Israel 11 days ago. Earlier, Israel was the target of a coordinated attack by Hezbollah and Iran. Tehran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps confirmed it was the first joint attack since the start of the war on Iran. Across Israel, strikes and interceptions were reported in several locations. Iran has been targeting fuel storage facilities as the conflict in the Middle East enters its 13th day, sending Brent crude oil prices up to $100 a barrel. As we mentioned, Iraq suspended operations at its oil ports after 2 foreign fuel tankers were hit in the southern port of Al-Faw. At least 1 crew member was killed, while another 25 were rescued. Multiple drones struck fuel storage tanks at the port of Salalah in Oman. The strike triggered explosions and towering flames. Salalah's port is an important hub for tankers seeking to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. And a Thai vessel was hit by a projectile while transiting the Strait of Hormuz on Wednesday. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Center said a fire broke out on board. 20 crew members have been rescued following the attack. Mahmoud Abdelwahed has more from Baghdad.
Huge explosion because these 2 tankers were hit by an explosive-laden boat. Iraqi officials have been cited by news agencies saying that it's an Iranian explosive-laden boat. These 2 tankers were full of crude oil from the Iraqi port of Qasr in southern Iraq, and they're sailing on their way across the Gulf towards the Strait of Hormuz. This comes, of course, as you know, after Iran has been threatening to target oil tankers approaching the Strait of Hormuz. But the Iraqi officials say this is a flagrant violation of Iraq's sovereignty, given the fact that this act of, as they say, act of sabotage has happened in Iraq's territorial water. And the SOMO is the national oil firm here in Iraq, says that such attacks threaten the safety, the maritime safety, and also it's affecting Iraq's economy and oil production. As you know, that as a result of this, the oil operations have been halted in southern Iraq, and also this is a huge blow to the Iraq's economy, which is already overstretched. As you know, that Iraq relies on about more than 90% of its budget from oil revenues, and it has decreased its oil production from 3,300,000 barrels a day to 1 million barrels a day.
U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran have continued overnight. So let's get more now from Tawhid Asadi, who joins us live from the Iranian capital, Tehran. Tawhid, let me ask you first to please just bring us up to speed with all the latest on the attacks that the U.S. and Israel have been conducting on Iran.
Well, let me just begin not with the latest, but something that happened on Saturday night, and it was the explosions that happened in the oil facilities across the Iranian capital, including in southern parts of the capital. The reason I'm just raising it is the very fact that right now you can see this black cloud, which is the result of the thick smoke drifting through the air. And now we've got different reports, concerning reports about the contamination of the air that people are right now breathing, as well as contaminations of soil and water, which could put a long-time impact on the very ordinary citizens who have been living in this city, in the capital. And for our viewers, we are talking about Tehran province, in which roughly 14 million people have been living. Part of that have decided to evacuate the city following the initiation of the strikes, but there's still another considerable proportion of the population in the capital have decided to stay. And then speaking of the latest, we know that last night we heard, and I personally heard actually sounds related to the activation of the air defense system in the Iranian capital, as well as the active presence of drones across the skies of the Iranian capital. Meanwhile, we've got reports of explosion from different cities beyond the capital, from, I can say, an industrial complex in southern parts of the capital, as well as Isfahan, Kashan, Ahvaz, and Saqqez. These are the cities that we have footages and reports coming about the explosions taking place, and we have to also keep in mind that it's more than 200 cities from the initiation of these confrontations being targeted in different parts of the Iranian territories. This is one point. And then there is another concerning point, which is related to the death toll. We know that more than 1,300 people have been killed, even though seeing the continuous nature of these strikes, we can unfortunately say that there is a risk potentiality for the number to grow even up. So they are dealing with a tough situation for ordinary citizens, as this is not just the police stations, the military headquarters or state buildings, but also residential areas such as the schools and hospitals being targeted. On the other hand, we've got the Iranian army side, the IRGC in particular, talking about their retaliatory actions. And now the situation seems to be anywhere close to de-escalation, as they talked about the 40th wave of their retaliatory strikes. And meanwhile, we've got a security official in Iran who told Al Jazeera last night that the regional war will soon enter a new phase. He continued to say that if the United States makes such mistakes as initiating the strike on Iran, the situation could become much more complicated. And again, another important line that he mentioned is speaking of one of the strategically important choke points in the region, Strait of Hormuz. He said that another key strait will face the same fate as the Strait of Hormuz. So it seems that regionally speaking, Iranians are trying to rebalance, to reshape their behavior as the escalations ramp up to next levels.
All right, that's Tawhid Asadi live for us from Tehran. Tawhid, thanks so much for all that. Let's turn now to Zaina Khudr, who's live for us in Beirut. Zaina, we know that Beirut's been coming under an increasing number of attacks by Israel, and there was that strike on the Ramat al-Bayda where you are, which is a popular beachfront district. Could you just bring us up to speed with all the latest developments on that?
Well, there's been a marked escalation in this conflict. We are in Ramat al-Bayda, like you mentioned, a seaside boulevard in the heart of Beirut. The car behind me targeted in the early hours of the morning by an apparent Israeli drone strike. When people gathered around the car, another strike came in, a double tap strike. People here are sleeping in their cars, in their tents. They are people displaced by the ongoing conflict. It wasn't just the only attack. Beirut's southern suburbs came under intense bombardment. There were strikes in the south of the country, in the east of the country. The death toll is climbing. What is clear is that we have entered a new phase in this conflict. Last night, the Israeli military really promising an extensive wave of attacks, which it did carry out, following Hezbollah's largest rocket barrage since the start of this latest confrontation. According to Israeli media reports, Hezbollah fired 100 rockets across the border at the same time. And it wasn't just Hezbollah firing, it was in coordination with Iran. And a statement by Iran's Revolutionary Guards calling this a joint and integrated operation. These rocket launches with Hezbollah really, marks an escalation in this conflict, a new phase in this conflict. We knew from the start Hezbollah opened the front in retaliation for the killing of the late Iranian supreme leader, but now it's really official that it is the same front. This is not a separate theater of military operations, but one front, with yesterday Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Assim issuing a statement pledging allegiance to the new supreme leader.
Zaina, I just want to talk for a moment about the fact that, of course, it's not just Beirut that's being affected right now. Other parts of Lebanon have come under heavy bombardment by Israel, and hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced as a result of all this. You were speaking just a moment ago about the people that were displaced as a result of this latest strike on Ramlat al-Bayda. The rest of the people, all these people that have been displaced, where are they going, and what's being done to help them?
Nearly 1 million people displaced by this conflict, people from southern Lebanon. The east of the country, not many people have left the Baalbek region and the Bekaa region because they are poor. They have nowhere else to go. And that's why you see these high casualty numbers always in strikes in the east of the country. Those people don't leave their areas. This happened in late 2024. The government is struggling to put up enough shelters. They've opened the stadium. They've opened schools across the country. It's just not enough, with the social affairs minister saying approximately 100,000 are in shelters, and the rest, yes, some can afford to rent apartments, to stay in hotels, some have family members, some have left the country, but the majority do not have the means to do so. And the majority are afraid to go to other areas of the country. This is a deeply divided society, a divided political landscape, polarized communities. Those who support Hezbollah are mainly from the Shia community, and they are coming under fire. Other communities in Lebanon blame Hezbollah for dragging the country into this war. So there are already underlying tensions here. And also, when you see these targeted strikes hitting buildings across the country outside Hezbollah strongholds, people are starting to worry and not allow people who are displaced to live in their buildings. So this is really a social crisis as well, humanitarian crisis, and the war is only escalating.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Zaina Khudr, live for us with all the latest from the Ramlat al-Bayda area in Beirut, Lebanon. Thanks so much, Zaina. Nida Ibrahim is live for us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Nida, good to see you. There's been another round of missiles fired on Israel, not just from Iran, but also from Lebanon. So what more can you tell us about those developments?
As we've been reporting, this was a coordinated attack between Hezbollah and Iran. According to the Israeli army, the first of such intensity. They've noticed around 8 p.m. yesterday local time that Hezbollah fired an opening salvo of 100 rockets into northern Israel. This is the largest batch since the conflict began between the two parties on March 2nd, when it started with a first 3 rocket barrage by Hezbollah into Israel, which was seen in the beginning as a retaliation for the U.S. and Israeli killing of the late Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. But that has been a significant increase in these rockets, marking a different phase. According to Channel 14, the Israeli Channel 14, it was a miracle that no one was injured. Of course, there has been damage in some of the cities, as reported by by certain municipality mayors and officials. But generally speaking, the information we get from Israel is very minimal regarding the damage. And that issue also sends hundreds of thousands of Israelis into shelters, as we've seen from these Hezbollah rockets. This is something that the Israeli government is trying to treat very carefully. Yes, they know that the people are supporting the war on Iran, but they need to be careful about how much time Israelis are being kept in shelters. This is yet another week of this. We're approaching the end of the second week of this confrontation. And Israeli officials seem to be backtracking a little bit on the main goal that was described by the Israelis for launching the war, which was changing the regime and eliminating the Iranian threat. Now they seem to be focusing on the most likely goal, which is eliminating the threat coming from Iran and Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah is another story, because for the Israeli officials, they have not ruled out the possibility of a major ground invasion. They say maybe when the front on Iran calms down, they will push more troops into southern Lebanon. They talk about the security buffer zone in their aims, as they say, to protect the Israeli communities in northern Israel from these Hezbollah rockets. One specific missile the Israelis have been focusing on from Hezbollah, they say that they believe Hezbollah has tens of, is a surface-to-surface missile that can travel long ranges and can arrive, and one of them did in areas near Jerusalem. And if it can do so, that means it can hit strategic and military facilities. This is something that is worrying for Israelis, even though as they try to confront and tell their audience that the war is going according to schedule, that it's not going to take a long time, that they are right on track, and it could take 2 weeks or so. But this is, again, an issue that is hindering the economy, with losses weekly estimated at $3 billion in Israel, with the businesses not working, as well as schools being shut. So it's a situation where the Israeli government has to be very strategic about when it comes to keeping the population supporting this war.
All right, that's Nida Ibrahim live for us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Thanks so much, Nida. A drone has crashed into a residential tower in Dubai. A minor fire broke out in the building in the Creek Harbor district. Authorities say no one was injured. It was one of several attacks on the UAE on Wednesday, including a drone strike near Dubai's international airport. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian has spoken with the Sultan of Oman after drones struck oil storage facilities in the port of Salalah. Sultan Haytham bin Tariq condemned the attack. Pezeshkian told him the incident will be investigated. Salalah's port has become an increasingly important hub for tankers seeking to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. Qatar's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mohammed bin Abdurrahman Al Thani has addressed Qatar's Council of Ministers, urging resilience in the face of Iranian attacks.
نجتمع اليوم والمنطقة تمر في ظروف عصيبة.
We meet today as our region is going through grave circumstances due to the ongoing military escalation that has affected the region and has also targeted the state of Qatar, regrettably, with repeated attacks from Iran, which have not been limited to military targets alone, but have also struck civilian targets, showing little regard for the harm inflicted upon Qatar and the resources of its people. At this stage, it is important to recognize the significance of the moment our country is going through. Qatar has faced many difficult challenges in recent years, and each time, by the grace of God, we have emerged stronger. Such experiences have taught us the importance of perseverance and the need to continue strengthening the resilience of our country in the face of such challenges. Therefore, under the current political and economic circumstances, I urge you all to prioritize spending in ways that strengthen our resilience. And when this hardship passes, God willing, we must maintain this same level of commitment.
The UN Security Council has passed a resolution put forward by Gulf Cooperation Council members calling on Iran to halt attacks on Gulf states. Al Jazeera's Gabriel Elizondo reports from New York.
Will those in favor of the draft resolution please raise their hand?
The message to Tehran is clear. Stop attacking your neighboring countries in the Gulf.
The draft resolution has been adopted.
It condemns Iran's attacks on Gulf countries and demands they stop.
The adoption of this resolution today sends a clear message, a united message from the Security Council that missile attacks and drone attacks perpetrated by the Islamic Republic of Iran that targeted a number of regional states, including the Kingdom of Bahrain, are completely rejected and are flagrant violations of the Charter of the United Nations and international law and the principles of good neighborliness.
Before the meeting, Qatar's ambassador said Iran's attacks are illegal.
Let us be clear. These attacks by the Islamic Republic of Iran have targeted our sovereign territory, endangered civilian populations, and caused damage to civilian infrastructure in the state of Qatar. These actions are a clear violation of international law and the UN Charter.
135 countries co-sponsored the resolution. That is the most co-sponsors of any Security Council resolution ever. The level of support is unprecedented. Iran's ambassador said Tehran would not recognize the resolution because it doesn't condemn the U.S. and Israeli attacks on his country.
The very purpose of this biased and politically motivated text, which was pushed by Israeli regime and the United States, is clear: to reverse the roles and position of victims and aggressors. It rewards the regimes of the United States and Israel, which have violated the UN Charter and committed acts of aggression.
Russia and China agree with Iran, but abstained rather than using their veto power.
This meeting is adjourned.
The world has now spoken. The big question now is, will Tehran listen? Gabriel Elizondo, Al Jazeera, the United Nations in New York.
U.S. President Donald Trump has urged oil tankers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz as Iran tightens its chokehold on the crucial maritime route. Trump promised safe passage for the vessels, but did not provide details. The U.S. president also said the operation against Iran is not over yet. Iran says it's ready for a long war of attrition that would destroy the world economy.
We took out just about all of their mine ships in one night. We're up to boat number 60. I didn't realize they had that big a Navy. I would say it was big and ineffective. But every one of their ships, just about all of their Navy is gone at the bottom of the sea.
Mr. President, how do you respond? Mr. President, have they laid any mines in the Strait of Hormuz?
We don't think so.
Jason Campbell is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and former civilian Pentagon official. He says Trump's latest messaging about the war in Iran is still very vague.
Yeah, it's been very interesting. He's speaking in broad platitudes that we're really hitting them like never before and that we need to finish the mission. It's a very mixed message because on the one hand, yes, the United States is continuing to conduct airstrikes over Iran and dealing with a number of other threats. But I keep wondering what he means by finish the job, because if that includes a regime change, I think it's going to be very difficult to achieve here without a significant escalation of U.S. effort, and would go against his little excursion phrase that he keeps referring this to by. Well, I think both in rhetoric and action, things do appear to be escalatory on both sides. Now, in terms of what the conditions that Iran is putting forward are to Russia and Pakistan, that remains to be seen. And it's somewhat encouraging to hear that there's at least mention of this, which we have not heard over the last few days. The big question becomes, what is the U.S. reaction going to be to it, and what kind of agreement might they be willing to live with, given the more of the maximalist stances the U.S. has taken when it comes to the nuclear program, the ballistic missiles, proxies, and other things.
All right, let's take a look at some of the day's other news now. 4 people have been killed in Ukraine in the latest exchange of drone fire with Russia. 2 died and several were wounded in the eastern city of Kharkiv. Ukraine's second-largest city, just 30 kilometers from the border, has been encircled and under constant attack throughout the 4-year conflict. Palestinian families in the occupied West Bank are in mourning after a surge in attacks by Israeli settlers. They say the violence has intensified since Israel and the U.S. launched a joint offensive against Iran. Hamza Mohammed reports.
Grief fills the home of Malak Berat. Her husband, Thair Hamayil, was killed by Israeli settlers. Now she clings to his clothes, searching for traces of the life they shared. Witnesses say Thair was trying to protect his neighbors in Khirbit Abu Falah, north of Ramallah. His cousin was also killed. Residents say more than 100 settlers had amassed near the village.
The young men and the people gathered to protect the area. There was a huge number of settlers. At the beginning, it was stone throwing. Then the settlers started to shoot towards the residents. I was with them at a site away from the settlers. They shot towards us, and unfortunately, the bullet hit his head, killing him.
The Israeli rights group Beit Salim says a third man died after inhaling tear gas. Israeli forces deployed to the village fired during the violence. A day later, another Palestinian was killed near Hebron. This video shows him lying on the ground after being shot. A uniformed settler holds a weapon nearby. The Israeli military said the shooter was a reserve soldier and that it's opened an investigation. Monitoring groups have documented more than 100 settler attacks in the occupied West Bank since the US-Israeli offensive against Iran began less than 2 weeks ago. With an increase in shootings, assault, property damage and threats, Palestinians say they feel increasingly alone and unprotected. Hamza Mohammed, Al Jazeera.
Chile's new far-right president has been sworn in. Jose Antonio Cast has promised to overturn some of the progressive policies of his left-wing predecessor and lead what he's calling an emergency government. Lucia Newman reports.
It's an image few would have imagined even a year ago. Jose Antonio Cast, the son of German immigrants, receiving Chile's presidential sash. It signals the sharpest political shift to the far right since the country's military coup in 1973.
To confront our emergencies in security, in healthcare, in education, employment, and so much more, Chile needs an emergency government, and that's what we'll have. An emergency government isn't a slogan, it's a reality. It means order where there's chaos, and a firm hand where there's impunity.
Outgoing left-wing President Gabriel Boric put on a brave face at the inauguration. Almost all the conservative leaders of the region were in attendance, embracing Cast with enthusiasm. Cast was a strong supporter of Chile's former dictator, General Augusto Pinochet, and, inspired by Donald Trump and his MAGA movement, has pledged to make Chile great again. He supports conservative social values and even broader free market economic policies. Chileans hope he will make good on his electoral promises to reduce crime, control undocumented migration, and increase economic growth. A sharp shift in foreign policy is already in the making. On Saturday, Cast attended a summit of like-minded regional leaders hosted by President Trump, who offered to use U.S. military missiles to crush organized crime in Latin America, an offer that Cast told us he would consider.
There are armed drug traffickers amongst us who kidnap people. What we're seeing in Chile should concern us, and anyone who offers collaboration will receive it.
Cast has indicated he'll end Chile's staunch support for the Palestinian cause in favor of Israel, and says he'll halt humanitarian aid to Cuba until there's a change of government. In these times of geopolitical uncertainties, the arrival of Latin America's newest president is being welcomed by members of the growing far-right wave in the Americas, a wave whose priorities President Trump has made clear he wants to determine. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera.
All right, that's it from me, Mohammed Jamjoom. Up next, Inside Story looks at the consequences of the war in the Middle East for Europe as it competes with Asia for oil and gas supplies. Thanks so much for watching.
In-depth analysis of the day's headlines.
Is this a genuine attempt to revive Venezuela's oil industry or surrender of state control under pressure?
Critical debate.
Netanyahu has repeatedly threatened to annex the West Bank.
Netanyahu doesn't have to annex the West Bank because effectively it's already happened.
Informed opinions.
It's still the richest, most powerful country on earth, and the idea that it's always been cheated and that needs to put tariffs, I think the world is getting tired of that.
Inside Story on Al Jazeera.
on Counting the Cost. Oil markets are on edge. American consumers are already feeling it at the pump. Europe faces an energy crunch and Asian importers are scrambling to secure supply. Could this reignite inflation around the world, and what would that mean for households? Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera.
Europe under pressure as the conflict in the Middle East continues, now competing with Asia for scarcer oil and gas supplies. Rocketing prices benefit Russia and weaken sanctions over the Ukraine war, with Europe wary of antagonizing Donald Trump. So how's the Iran war impacting all of these? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. Like everywhere else, Europe has been plunged into an energy price crisis in a matter of days. The US and Israel began attacking Iran less than a fortnight ago. Now, Europeans face stiff competition for oil and gas from Asia, with reports of ships being diverted to higher bidders. The Ukraine war upended European energy policy. The EU imposed sanctions on its main supplier, Russia, and Moscow is now benefiting from higher oil and gas prices because of the offensive against Iran. European leaders continue to tiptoe diplomatically around President Donald Trump, hoping he'll broker a Ukraine peace deal that they can back. It's a complex picture, not least because Trump, along with Israel, is responsible for starting the present war. So how might this all play out? We'll ask our guests shortly, but first, this report from Amma Butang.
Global energy markets are on edge once again. The conflict in the Middle East is causing sharp fluctuations in oil and gas prices. European leaders, still haunted by the 2022 energy crisis, are bracing for another potential economic shock. The bloc imports only about 10% of its liquefied natural gas from Qatar, but rising global competition for cargo is already pushing prices higher.
Since the beginning of this conflict, gas prices have risen by 50% and oil prices have risen by 27%. If you translate this in euros, the 10 days of war have already cost European taxpayers an additional 3 billion euros in fossil fuel imports.
Economists warn it could fuel inflation and slow growth across the continent. But the surge in prices could also make Russia the main beneficiary and, by extension, strengthen its war effort against Ukraine.
It gains new resources to finance its war against Ukraine as energy prices rise. It profits from the diversion of military capabilities that could otherwise have been sent to support Ukraine. And it benefits from the reduced attention to the Ukrainian front as the conflict in the Middle East takes center stage.
The European Union had been preparing to introduce a ban on its remaining Russian energy contracts. In response, President Vladimir Putin warned that Moscow could redirect its exports to prioritize other markets.
Russia is a reliable supplier of energy. It has always been so. We will continue to supply oil and gas to countries that are reliable counterparts. I mean, not only our partners in the Asia-Pacific region, but also states in Eastern Europe such as Slovakia and Hungary.
The situation has been further complicated by comments from US President Donald Trump, signaling Washington could ease sanctions on some nations to stabilize global energy supplies. Although he didn't specify which countries, Russia is a possibility. Washington has already granted India a 30-day waiver to continue buying Russian oil as part of its efforts to ease price volatility. As the conflict in the Middle East increasingly reshapes global energy markets, its ripple effects are being felt far beyond the battlefield. Amma Butang, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Now, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Berlin is Stephen Erlanger, the chief diplomatic correspondent for Europe at the New York Times. In Moscow is Chris Wiefer, CEO of Macro Advisory, a strategic consultancy focused on Russia and Eurasia. And in Riverdale Park in Maryland is Alan Tunnelson, who is an economist and founder of the Reality Check blog. A welcome to you all. Let me start in Maryland with Alan. Alan, this is a victory for Russia if Donald Trump eases sanctions. It's going to plunge Europe into crisis, and it was completely avoidable. I mean, do you have any sympathy with that argument?
I have no sympathy with that argument whatever. And the main reason is that however discouraging things look right now economically and also geopolitically, and especially for Europe, not for the United States, especially for Europe, we have to ask ourselves, how much worse would this situation be if Iran had acquired nuclear weapons? How much power would these mullahs, these Islamic fanatics, have had over the entire world economy if they acquired nuclear weapons? And I would submit to you, it is glaringly obvious that things would be much worse.
I mean, they
and by the way, President Obama's 2015 Iran nuclear deal at best kicked the problem down the road a bit, and it was very flawed regarding inspections.
Well, let's bring that to Stephen. Stephen, this is a typical argument, right, from the Americans. You had to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon, but that was what the negotiations were for, and they were ongoing. So do you have any sympathy with the position that Alan takes?
Well, I don't want to see a nuclear-armed Iran, and I don't think anyone really wanted to see a nuclear-armed Iran. Now, the mullahs kept saying we would never have a nuclear weapon, but of course they were enriching uranium to 60%, which is very close to bomb grade. Now, I don't think they were going to have one very quickly, but had they chosen to have one, it could have happened. But I do believe the JCPOA, the Iran deal in 2015, though Mr. Thompson's right, it was limited. In fact, it's now expired 10 years later. It did limit Iran's enrichment to 3.67%, which is pretty reasonable. So now we have an Iran with at least 10 or 11 bombs worth of 60% highly enriched uranium buried somewhere, we think, under Isfahan. And so that's a danger. Now, does this war make the chance of Iran going nuclear more likely or less likely? That's a very serious question. I don't know the answer, but I worry that if the regime survives, which it seems to be doing, it will make the chance of Iranian bomb more likely rather than less likely. But I'm not a prophet, and we shall see.
I mean, that clearly sets out the American position. I want to bring Chris in here, but lifting of the sanctions, if that happens, it's already a propaganda victory for the Russians. But if the lifting happens, you know, that is a knock-on effect on Europe completely, right? I mean, it's a problem for Europe.
Well, it is to the extent that the European Union, as you said in the introduction, is already agreed and has adopted a plan to completely cut itself off from all Russian energy, oil and gas by the end of this year. It's supposed to start on April 25th with a ban on any new short-term LNG contracts and then a ban on all contracts by the December 31st this year. So I guess the assumption that Europe made when it adopted this plan is that it would be easily able to get as much energy as it needed from the global market, from the Gulf and elsewhere. And now that clearly has got an enormous question mark over it. So Europe's energy strategy is in tatters. They are definitely facing a potential crisis if they get the next moves wrong. And remember, the backdrop here is that European gas reserves coming out of this winter are at an historic low. They used a lot of gas for heating this winter. They would normally need to start rebuilding those reserves for next winter, certainly by June at the latest. And now there's an enormous question mark over where are they going to get that gas and how much will they have to pay for it. So if you like, Europe's problems with regard to energy are only just beginning.
And Alan, that situation there is very, very stark, but it begs the question, did Donald Trump know what he was doing when he got into the Iran war? Did he know that this was going to have an impact on oil prices, gas prices, this severely?
Well, certainly Donald Trump knew what he was doing when in 2018, he asked the Europeans, why are you still so dependent on Russian energy sources at the same time you're expecting the United States to protect you from Russia? And I found it fascinating to just find out this morning that 4 years after the Ukraine invasion, Europe still has not cut itself off from Russian energy supplies. For decades, we've heard about Eurosclerosis in terms of the continent's poor economic performance. And now it's very, very clear that concerning matters like energy resilience, that term Eurosclerosis applies even more strongly.
Stephen, do you think Donald Trump knew what he was doing?
That's a very good question. I can't read into his head. He was warned by General Kane, the chief of the armed forces, that this could be a very difficult and long war that would test America's supply of interceptors. It's one reason why they waited a few weeks to get a second aircraft carrier off the coast of Iran. But I think they expected a short war, to be honest. I don't think they expected it to go on this long. Trump said publicly that the jump in energy prices would be a short-term blip, as it had been in the last June bombing, which lasted 12 days, and it would soon go back to normal. I don't think they thought through, I don't know why, the Strait of Hormuz shutting down, essentially, because for the last 50 years, people have been worried about the Strait of Hormuz. This is hardly a new topic in security anxieties. So I do think he expected a quicker victory. I think he expected the decapitation of the regime to result in a different government fairly quickly that would talk to him. So far, that's not proved to be true. The war continues. We don't know for how long, but I think the markets are beginning to have an impression on the White House, which could, after all, declare victory at any time and leave. But to lose a war against Iran, I think, would be a very difficult thing for Americans to understand.
Chris, without Russia firing a shot, it seems to be the only winner in this particular conflict. I mean, is that something that you think is true?
Well, Russia is definitely gaining financially from this situation. Remember that Russia, because of the sanctions that the US announced in late October, which then took effect in late November, Russia's seen a significant fall in oil and gas export revenue for the last 3 months, December, January, and February. Because not only was it finding it difficult to find customers for oil, I mean, there's certainly reports of oil literally floating around in tankers looking for a buyer, but they've had to sell a lot of that oil at significant discounts. So while Brent, for example, was trading at about $65, there were reports that Russia was selling its oil for about $45. Now, as of early last week, we know that almost all of that surplus oil has been snapped up by Asian buyers and at close to market price. So our calculation, our back of the envelope calculation, is that Russian export value rose by at least $3 billion last week, roughly the same amount that the European Union say has cost energy, higher energy costs has cost Europe. So Russia clearly has benefited, but it's not the only one. Remember, significant beneficiaries will be the oil producers in, the U.S. oil states. The Dallas Fed, Federal Reserve Bank, late last year issued a report or a warning saying that a lot of particularly independent oil producers in states like Texas, Oklahoma, etc., which, as I understand it, are strongly Republican states, that they were close to financial strain, saying that they needed at least $60 West Texas just to survive. So they will gain a lot from this higher oil price. And this is, to say, strong backing for the Republicans and for Donald Trump, but also gas producing states. Australia is a big LNG producer, as is Canada is a big oil producer. So Russia is not the only country that is gaining from this, but it certainly makes budget management a heck of a lot easier at these oil prices and with demand for Russian oil, and the fact that they don't have to sell at a discount.
Alan, Russia's not the only winner here. In fact, as Chris was saying, some Republican states are going to get a financial bonanza here. But Russia's the only one that's at war with Ukraine. West Texas isn't. And that's a dangerous precedent. If you give Russia that money, which effectively you have, you're extending the war in Ukraine.
Oh, there's no question about that. At the same time, we really have to keep in mind that the oil industry, in fact, the entire fossil fuel industry, is a classic boom and bust industry. And the big successful companies, the big successful Western companies in particular, that dominate production in the U.S. and the rest of the Western world, are very good at navigating these ups and downs. And as we, I think, just heard, as global oil prices rise, U.S. producers have much more incentive to put more supply on stream, and that's clearly what's going to happen. And we're going to see these oil price fluctuations continue, certainly for the next few months, as the Persian Gulf situation remains very uncertain. But it's also so very clear that at least from the U.S. standpoint, that the situation is very well in hand, in large part because the U.S. economy has become much less fossil fuel intensive than it's ever been.
Now, I want to bring in Stephen here. Stephen, capitalism will do what capitalism does best, right? It'll react to a market. That's exactly what's happening with the energy price sector. But Europe is now competing with Asia when it comes to getting gas physically into their borders. So, what are the options here for Europe? And is Europe panicked about this? Are the people you're speaking to in diplomatic circles panicked about this?
Well, panic, no, because I don't think people think this is going to go on forever. I mean, the problem is Europe, having weaned itself from a great deal of Russian energy, to be sure not all of it, is more vulnerable now. It does need to get gas before next winter, but next winter is several months away. The problem will be, I think, price in the end rather than supply. So I don't think panic yet, no. But there are some European countries, Hungary and Slovakia, which get direct oil from Russia. There's a pipeline that got damaged going through Ukraine, so they're struggling with that. The big problem Europe has is the security of Ukraine. The way this war in the Middle East is using up Patriot missiles and other kinds of interceptors, which have a very small number of them in the world, is taking them away from Ukraine, which needs them to protect itself from Russian missiles and drones. So I think the big worry Europe has is less, energy, though that's real, than it is protecting Ukraine from a longer struggle that uses up important interceptor missiles that the Europeans are buying from the Americans, but which the Americans are diverting sometimes for their own use in Iran. So
it's a very good point you make.
Is the bigger worry.
It's a very good point you make because South Korea is actually worried about this. We're talking about Asia because the Americans are moving their THAAD missile interceptors out of South Korea and diverting them to the war effort in Iran. I want to come to Chris here. Chris, there is a strategic advantage here for Russia. There's a political advantage here for Russia, but there's also a military advantage here for Russia when it comes to Ukraine. May Russia use this to push further into Ukrainian territory and, you know, put Europe on a knife edge?
Well, I don't think so. The conflict's been going on for 4 years now. Russia does appear to be making some gains, but it's literally inch by inch. Of course, we talk and we know the situation with regards to possible supply tightness on interceptor missiles, etc. But the Ukraine military is very effective. It's well dug in. The fact that Russia maybe is earning an extra $3 billion in exports even per week is not going to change that dynamic on the ground. It's not going to help the Russian military accelerate its gains in East Ukraine, for example. In fact, I would say that the fact that Russia is making this extra money really doesn't make much of a difference. It certainly makes the finance minister sleep better at night until he has less money to borrow to balance the budget. But it doesn't really change anything. Russia was not heading towards any sort of financial crisis, even in January or February with the low oil receipts. It was not facing any sort of economic pressures that would force it to compromise at the peace talks. And that situation really hasn't changed just because it's earning a lot more money today. The fact is that it would appear from all reports that fighting in East Ukraine is pretty much bogged down. And what's happening in the energy markets financially isn't going to change that. But what might change that, I guess, to address your point, is that if Europe, for example, were to end up in a more difficult energy situation, perhaps even facing an energy crisis, particularly with regard to gas, when in the next few months when it needs to start rebuilding for next winter, then I guess from the Russian perspective, they may hope that Europe would be more inclined perhaps to press President Zelensky for more compromises at the negotiating table, something which, of course, they have not done. They strongly support President Zelensky's position, but the Russian view is that if the energy crisis gets worse, then Europe's political position may have to change in the next couple of months. That clearly depends on what happens in the Gulf and how long it lasts, but that's some of the narrative that we're beginning to hear here in Moscow.
Alan, once again, given everything our guests have just said and that you've been listening to, this was all completely avoidable. You knew that the Strait of Hormuz was going to...
I completely disagree. I'm sorry, I completely disagree.
You predicted that the energy infrastructure would get hit and therefore prices would go up? Because I don't think anybody was talking about that just a fortnight ago when this started.
I don't think anybody expected that Persian Gulf military operations were going to leave global energy markets unaffected. Nobody in their right mind would have ever seen that. What was clearly thought was that the overriding imperative was to make sure that Iran never acquired nuclear weapons, because that would have been absolutely catastrophic, not only for global energy markets, but for the global economy, period, and for global security as well. And when you face situations like this, you have competing priorities, you have to choose, and I think that the United States has chosen correctly.
The United States surely has just chosen the United States, though, Alan. Quickly?
What else do you expect the United States government to do? I mean, certainly we don't ignore the interests of foreign countries, and especially American allies, but American leaders are elected to safeguard and to promote the interests of the American people first. But I would also have to add that, once again, preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon in the long run will be a tremendous benefit for the entire world, and nobody should overlook that.
I mean, I will point out here that the last Supreme Leader did have a fatwa saying Iran wasn't going to go for a nuclear weapon, which is effectively law in Iran. But I want to come to Stephen here. Stephen, America has basically abandoned Europe, right? That's what's happened.
Not in the least. We have 70,000 American soldiers in Europe, along the frontiers with Russia, in Germany, in Poland, in Romania, defending NATO, deterring anything that might happen. The United States has not abandoned Europe. What the United States wants to do is Europe to take more responsibility for its own defense. It is true that on this war, I don't think America really cared what Europe thought. I mean, it didn't consult, nor did it warn. But in terms of abandoning Europe, I think that's simply not true.
Chris, there's a pivot here that Russia can do quite effectively. If it winds up that its biggest market, its most prestigious market in many ways, is going to be Asia because of just the sheer value of it, it can position itself from weaning itself from what Europe wants, and that's a political victory for it because it becomes slightly more independent.
Well, I think, you know, the position or the narrative in Moscow, and what we hear in Moscow a lot, is that you know, initial talk about Asia pivot has definitely moderated. You know, the Russians don't want to be any more, you know, dependent on China as they say they were with Europe. The whole narrative in Moscow is much more about diversification, having more trade partners, more investment partners, more political partners. But you are right that sort of over the medium term, Russia has already gone through the pain of, you know, diverting its energy resources away from, you know, what was its dominant market, the European Union, to Asia. It's taken that financial hit in 2023. And it's now, you know, almost entirely shifted focus towards China. And, you know, just go back to what you were saying earlier, you know, Europe certainly is in the most vulnerable economic position. You know, militarily, certainly is a different issue, but economically it is in the most vulnerable position. The US is certainly in a very comfortable position because it's energy self-sufficient. It produces enough oil for its domestic needs, and it's a big exporter of LNG.
Chris, I'm going
to
stop you there because we're running out of time, and I want to come to Alan just for a very quick answer because we are running out of time. Alan, what's the appetite here for the Americans? Will they stomach a $200 a barrel oil price if that happens? What's the appetite here for the war?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, and certainly we've seen in the recent past that the appetite that the American people have, mainly for more military casualties, is really quite limited. And I would imagine that folks are going to be very, very unhappy if oil prices stay this high for much longer, much less if they rise further.
I want to thank all of you, Stephen Erlinger, Chris Wiefer and Alan Tonelson, and thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, and for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here, bye for now.
As the war on Iran widens, its impact is spreading beyond the battlefield. Shockwaves are hitting global energy markets as facilities are damaged, supply routes disrupted, and risks to vital shipping lanes grow. Stay with Al Jazeera for continued coverage and expert analysis.
Since then, they've continued to fluctuate. The UN Security Council has passed a resolution put forward by Gulf Cooperation Council members calling on Iran to halt attacks on Gulf states. Al Jazeera's Gabriel Elizondo has this from New York.
Will those in favor of the draft resolution please raise their hand?
The message to Tehran is clear. Stop attacking your neighboring countries in the Gulf.
The draft resolution has been adopted.